Okay. Want to welcome everybody here for this evening's event, Creating a Vibrant Downtown, Part 1. My name is Shelley Repp, and I'm chair of the Committee of 100 on the Federal City. The committee was founded just over 100 years ago to sustain the fundamental values of the L'Enfant and Macmillan plans. Our history, which was recently published, is on the outside in the lobby if you want to pick one up before you leave. I encourage you to do so if you don't already have a copy of our history. 2023 was our centennial year, and to mark that milestone, we held a series of conversations that focused on some of our city's challenges. The 7 conversations from last year can be found on YouTube, and the link to the YouTube section with the conversations is in the program. The conversations were so interesting and informative that we decided to do 2 more this year. We originally planned on doing them on separate topics, but there was so much interest in downtown that both of our conversations this year, and the next one will be in May, will focus on downtown issues. To make sure that you receive any notice about the Part 2 program on May 16th, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. If you haven't already signed up with us electronically, there's no charge. Just like tonight, there's no charge. This evening, we're going to have 4 participants this evening, and each of the 4 participants will make brief remarks. Then there will be a moderated discussion with them, and after that, an opportunity for questions and answers from the audience. Please, please, please keep your comments and questions short so that there's time for others also before the end of the evening. The Committee of 100 members are identified by badges like this one, and we invite you to talk to us, to me, or any of the other members during the reception after the program is over. We welcome new members, and we hope to see you back at our next event, Part 2 of this discussion on downtown, on Thursday evening, May 16th, beginning at 6:30. For tonight's event, we're honored to have 4 distinguished speakers to address the present and future challenges of downtown from quite different perspectives. Very brief bios of each one is in your program. So what we're going to do is have each speaker individually come up and speak for no more than 10 minutes. And then there will be a discussion moderated by Carol Ayton. For our first speaker, we are pleased to welcome Professor John Rennie Short, an emeritus professor in the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Originally from Scotland, Professor Short has spent much of his career in the U.S. As you will see in the short bio contained in the program, he has studied, written, and spoken extensively on various issues of urban areas, focusing recently on downtowns. We have asked him to set the stage for this evening's conversation by sharing what he has learned and how that relates to DC's downtown, including what DC's near-term future might look like. Professor Short.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to see so many people, especially in such a gorgeous spring evening as tonight. Someone said, what does Emeritus mean? And it's an old Latin word, which roughly translated means boring old fart. So you'll have to... Carol asked me, one of the questions she posed towards me is, have we reached the bottom yet in terms of downtown? And I was reminded of Winston Churchill, one of the first victories that the Allies had in North Africa, and when they defeated Rommel, Churchill said, it's not the end, and it's not the beginning of the end, it's the end of the beginning, and I think we're at the end of the beginning for downtown, either further down or moving back up. Let me just set the scene. Often it's phrased or framed in terms of COVID was the reason behind the collapse. It did play a role, but it was the final straw. We've basically had a property bubble, a commercial property bubble, at least now for at least 10 to 15 years. It's been fueled by a number of things. It goes back to tax breaks during the Reagan administration. We've had essentially an era of very cheap money from 2000 onwards for all intents and purposes, and developers and office development is fueled by borrowed money. So it was very cheap to do that. The other thing that was happening was a kind of global financialization, as it's sometimes referred to. Office development in Washington, D.C. is funded by Canadian pension funds and probably a few Russian oligarchs. The Norwegian sovereign wealth fund has $1 trillion. It has to invest billions on a yearly basis. And for all this money sloshing around the world, property development was a good bet. It took up large chunks of money. If you have $1 trillion, you don't want to be buying individual buildings. You want to be involved in big $500 million, $5 billion developments. So that was one reason behind big footprinted office development, not only in cities around the world, but if you look at the wharf areas like this. So that financialization of capital, the ease of movement of money is partly behind this property development bubble that was slowly building. It was reinforced by cities eager, especially those on the wrong side of the tracks of economic development, looking for a sort of magic bullet to solve their problems. It increased a tax base, it brought money, it brought jobs. It was always a good thing for politicians to be seen cutting ribbons for new developments. There was this narrative that what could go wrong? Property development. It seemed like such a good idea. In retrospect, it sounds a bit like Bitcoin now. What could possibly go wrong with building office development? Now, there's always been booms and slumps because it's a speculative industry. And by speculative, I'm not being necessarily critical, they're building often before they have demand. There's something magical thinking behind property development. They're building before the demand. In other words, they have to borrow money. They kind of sense the market, but all of them, generally there's 90% of them, kind of follow the market. They all have the same idea at exactly the same time. They all think, wow, offices, what could possibly go wrong? And so we got more and more offices. So there was a property overhang beginning in around about 2015, 2016. You could follow that. So it wasn't the pandemic burst the bubble. The bubble was already deflating. So what happened with DC? DC was particularly prone to office development for a couple of reasons. You have the federal government. It's second only to San Francisco in the amount of downtown that is devoted to commercial offices. Other cities, Boston, for example, or San Diego, have a much bigger mix of land uses. And so they can ride out some of the deflation of commercial office space. Washington not. It's upwards of like 80, 85%, if not more, of downtown commercial space was devoted to offices. The other thing in DC was federal land takes up a big chunk, and so it kind of maximizes the need to get private development in order to raise taxation, right? There's obvious reasons. The federal land also gave an opportunity for big footprint development. You know, the wharf, the area along the Anacostia, federal government releasing Navy Yard would be another one. So in other words, there was this special circumstance for DC, federal land becoming available, especially in the last 20 years. So you had this big push for commercial development. often lubricated by this big financial capitalism, looking not for quick profits. What they're looking for is steady, long-term returns, relatively safe. And as we say, what could possibly go wrong with commercial offices, right? So there's already this overhang, and then along comes COVID. And the consequences are obvious. Complete close down. There was more than that. All this technology that we had before about doing face-to-face, people just couldn't be bothered doing it. We had got into the rut of turning up in person. I found it a shock when I had to start teaching on Zoom, for example. But then once you do, you kind of think, why do I need to commute again? So the number of people returning to the offices is not the same. So the demand has begun to shrunk. Now, there's a particular employment relationship, and that is, at the moment, we've generally had, amazingly, relatively full employment. It's difficult to discipline your workforce. So many companies are saying, we want you to come back to the office for all kinds of reasons, discipline, surveillance, group activity. Very difficult to do. Younger people are saying, I'm not coming back. And if you force me to come back, I'll get another job. So there's no way we're going to come back to that full, no vacancies. So the consequences are obvious. I'm getting the 1-minute warning. The consequences are obvious. Rising vacancy rates, falling rents, an urban doom loop possibility, the sense of less people coming in, the mass transit runs out of customers, small businesses begin to lose their customer base. We're faced with this issue of the downtown needs to be reinvented away from commercial office space. But it's like the Kubler-Ross sorts of like stages of grief. I don't think we've finally come to the acceptance yet that the downtown is not going to look the same. Now, the problem for DC is we have just acres of banal office space. You could convert about 50% of that to residential, but the residential demand is disappearing to a certain extent. Less people want to move downtown compared to 20 years ago. We have a banal office overhang that's difficult to know what to do. 50% conversion. I'll end with I was in China recently for a month at Shanghai University, and their issue was not so much the downtown, but malls. They have a huge overhang of shopping malls. And so what they've done is they've had to be much more creative, no government, help for them. So you can now go into a Chinese mall and buy a car. The first floor, the ground floor is given over to parking lots. You can get a cooking class. You can go and send your kids to a ballet class. I'm on the 1-minute warning. So in other words, China's mall development shows you what happens when you do a radical rethink. And we really need a radical rethink of what to do with all this acres of banality facing us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Short. Our second speaker is Gerren Price, Chief Executive Officer and President of the Downtown DC Business Improvement District, or BID. His diverse background and professional skills are certainly being put to a test in the current downtown DC climate. Gerren has been deeply involved in the development of the Downtown Action Plan. The implementation plan being developed is due in May. We have asked Gerren to give us an overview of the Downtown Action Plan and the companion public realm plan, and to note things in the mayor's recently recommended budget for FY25 and beyond that are intended to help the transformation happen. This is a daunting task, and we appreciate his willingness to summarize the plans in just 10 minutes. Gerren?
are very serious about your time limits here. It's like the Oscars, so I'm hoping there's no playoff music that is coming. I'll try to keep it under the 10-minute mark. I couldn't ask for a better lead up to this conversation. Professor Short, thank you so much for giving that really great synopsis of just the unique challenges that a lot of cities are facing, but then how that's really played out here in DC. I think you were spot on in terms of your assessment of some of the challenges that we live in. When I think about just the moment that we're in, you know, it's an understatement to say that change is needed. We certainly know that the downtown of the future is not going to look exactly like it did in 2019. And we certainly know that all signs are pointing to a need for that change even before the pandemic hit. And so it's not lost on me that this is not a new problem. This is a problem that certainly was brewing for quite some time. I was checking some of the archives of just the reports and studies and even budget requests that we had made at the downtown DC bid over the years. And we've been in effect since 1997, largely around the time that the MCI Center was built under the visionary leadership of Abe Pollin and some of the development that happened at that time under the leadership of Mayor Anthony Williams. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, even from 97, is that there was always conversation about the need for a residential base and mix here in downtown, a nod to ensuring there's a vibrant mix of uses to help create the kind of dynamic setting that people expect from a city. So if you're a city lover, the thing that draws you to and provides that allure when you think about it, it's not necessarily buildings, whether it's office or whether it's a residential building. It's really about the people. It's who you see. It's how people are moving to and through that area. It's seeing those little moments to just sort of watch people being human, right? And that's what attracts us. It's why cities endure. It's why we have great faith that this city and downtown DC will continue to shine for years to come. But the reality is we are in what I think is certainly a challenging situation. We have many, many indicators of challenges, some of which we know are staggering. So when I think about just our office vacancy challenge, between the downtown DC bid geography and the Golden Triangle bid geography, which collectively makes up what many think of as a central business district here in DC, we have over 20 million square feet of commercial office space that is vacant. Within our downtown DC bid boundaries in particular, it's 22.1% is our current vacancy rate. And when you look at the impact to our ground floor retail, it has been exacerbated through the pandemic. We actually have one of the highest rates of vacant ground floor retail space that we've had since the early 90s. We currently stand at 25% vacant ground floor retail spaces. That's alarming because again, when you think about being in a city and what attracts people here, when you walk down a street and there's nothing going on the ground floor, you begin to wonder, is this a space where I want to be? And so that vacancy breeds more vacancy, right? And that breeds feelings of it not being safe. And that breeds feelings of people not wanting to come down anymore for the shows and enjoying the restaurants. And helps to draw back on some of the demand for that residential. So we know we have a lot of challenges that we have to deal with. Other big implication, many people have talked about just the value of our downtown core as a central part of the city's economic engine. We know that it is a major contributor to the overall tax revenue that is generated by the city and funds many of the budget items that the city has to take care of each year. And when we look at some of the data and what it's showing in terms of the loss, we know that annual tax revenues have fallen by $240 million since 2019. And so as we see that loss, many people know we're in the middle of the DC budget cycle right now, and the mayor has talked about this being a year for budget sacrifices. And when we look at those gaps, a lot of that can be accounted for the loss that we've experienced here in downtown. Part of the reason we knew that we needed to embark on this downtown action plan was to help figure out how do we begin to turn the tide. We recognize that with no further intervention and no investment to try to change what's happening today, we actually stand to see further decline up to $190 million more per year that we would continue to bleed, and that we cannot afford as a city. So what we wanted to do with our downtown action plan was really take a moment to figure out what are the things that are going to help to completely reimagine downtown. The mayor had a vision in her DC comeback plan that spoke about the future of downtown being a real important part of the city's comeback. And she really honed in on a goal of bringing more residential into our downtown core, 15,000 new residents by 2028. And one of the things that she challenged our bid, as well as the Golden Triangle bid and the Federal City Council to really think about, was how do we make that happen, and what are the elements that it's going to take to reimagine downtown. So our downtown action plan was really meant to be complementary to that comeback plan and help to begin to identify the actions and people that are going to help to make these things come to fruition. So how do you start a downtown action plan? You got to talk to folks. And so we had an extensive period of stakeholder engagement that stretched over the course of about 6 months. I think in total, we had close to 10,000 unique engagements with people. That came in the form of surveys, focus groups, steering committee meetings, public sessions, where we were talking to as many people as we could to understand what will it take, what do people want to see to make our downtown more vibrant, more mixed use, and more successful down the line. What we got out of that was really some core elements that kept popping up in conversation. And frankly, some of this feels almost like common sense, but sometimes you have to state the things out loud and really name a thing for it to start to stick. But what people really landed on was that we know this cannot just be a place where people come because they have to go to work there. We need this to be a place where employers choose to locate and employees choose to work because they want to be here. We know that people need to live here, and we want people who want to be living in downtown. We know that our public realm has to showcase sustainable urbanism, has to showcase vibrant, green, welcoming spaces, and places that really draw people and make them want to come back. We know we have to lean into our visitor base and really attract people from around, not just the region, but really around the entire globe to really see downtown DC as a place where people want to spend their time. We also recognize that it has to be safe, that there has to be options for retail, and new catalysts that help to reimagine some of the big parcels and big spaces that are currently sitting dormant and vacant today. So some of the things that emerged as foundational points to this puzzle, we landed on 5 foundational elements that we knew are critical in order to get to the downtown that we want to see. It's not lost on me that we were engaging in this stakeholder process around the time that we were experiencing really unprecedented levels of challenges with respect to public safety. So one of the number one things that we heard throughout is that downtown's comeback has to be grounded in a framework of public safety. People have to feel safe in our downtown for it to be successful. We also heard and really believe we need to lean in, making sure that this is a place of choice for people to do business and that it's easy for people to do business here in DC. Again, leaning in on the residential component, making sure that people want to live here, and we have a robust set of options for residential. And then also really looking at transportation. How can we make sure that people see our transportation system as an asset and that it's something that really speaks to people as they move to and through downtown in all modalities? And finally, a lot of talk, but people want action. How do we make sure that it happens well? And so we talked a lot about the leadership frameworks that are needed to make this happen, what types of ongoing stakeholder engagement needs to take place, and how do we begin to ensure that folks are held accountable to that, and our leadership is held accountable. The other piece that I'll raise, and I know I got the warning sign that time is almost up, so I'll try to be brief here. We recognize that our downtown is not a monolith. It's not just one singular place in one downtown, but rather it's a collection of spaces, neighborhoods that in many cases have their own vibe, own feel, own value propositions. And so one of the things that emerged and a strategy that came about was really identifying what we landed on as 5 key neighborhood nodes that we believe can serve as catalysts for other investment if we get these areas right. And so those 5 nodes that we landed on included really where we're sitting now, thinking about the Penn Quarter, Chinatown, Gallery Place area as a node that deserves special focus. Also leaning into our downtown east area, so the things east of Gallery Place and stretching to Union Station and how we leverage the opportunities that exist there. Thinking about what we're calling historic green triangle, which is the really dynamic space that includes some of our parks along I Street, which includes Franklin Park, McPherson Park, Farragut Park, and how those connect to Lafayette Park, but seeing that as a space to really showcase the beautiful green spaces and amenities that we have in our public spaces. And then also thinking about the western edges of downtown, including Pennsylvania Avenue to the west, as well as the area just south of DuPont Circle. And so we began to identify some really strategic investments that can be made in those specific neighborhood nodes. And we believe that those can, again, catalyze other investment, attract other private investment that we think can really turn downtown around. In total, the plan includes $401 million of proposed investment that we believe over the course of 5 years, that $401 million can net significant returns and pay itself back in really short order. I mentioned this current budget cycle that we're in now. The mayor has been firm in believing that downtown investment is critical, and she has made a point to include many significant provisions in this year's budget that we support, and I look forward to talking more about those things. Last thing that I will say, and my time is up, so I know the music's about to cue up. I don't want to sound like a commercial, but I tried to summarize this plan in really quick terms. If you want more information about it and want to read it in detail, our highlight report is available at our website, reimaginedowntowndc.com. I would encourage you, take a look at this. We have a full version of that report coming in the next 30 to 60 days. So thank you so much for the opportunity and looking forward to the panel discussion as well.
Well, thank you for packing it all in, Gerren. Very helpful. Thank you. Our next speaker is Vicki Davis, a managing partner at Urban Atlantic. Her impressive credentials are noted in your program. However, I want to call attention to one of her projects, a big one, and that is she was selected as master developer for what is now the parks at Walter Reed. In case you don't know it, I mean, that's a massive project. It involves the new construction and the reuse of 11 historic buildings on the old Walter Reed campus. The project includes residential, retail, office, educational, and hotel components while preserving more than 20 acres of open space. In addition to the remarkably diverse scope and scale of this project, the project was also noteworthy because of how Vicki and her team sought and responded to input from the surrounding community. We look forward to hearing about that experience, how that experience might inform a transformation of DC's old downtown. Vicki?
I'm very happy to be here. Can you hear me? No. Okay. Can you put my mic on, Graham? Can you hear me now? Okay. I'm going to make a small adjustment because I want to walk around. Okay. How about now? Okay, great. I'm going to start by telling you that not only am I a real estate developer, but I've been in this business for just about 40 years. And I come from 4 generations of builders in DC and real estate developers. And it is a cyclical business. And you can count on a cycle every 7 to 10 years, and we've had some longer runs than that recently. And the professor was right, it's about money. And Gerren was right, and it's about people and what people want to do and demographics. Both of these pictures up here are before pictures. It's like the diet. It's the person before the diet. That's an older picture. And what you see in it are horses and buggies. And you also see a trolley system going through the city because we used to have a very vibrant trolley system. This right here is 14th Street, taken from Google Earth, and it's full of office buildings. And it, too, is a before picture, okay? So I wanted to share that with you. I don't think anybody here ever even gives a second thought to horses or buggy drivers or horses and what happened to all of them. They're gone. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. This is from 2018, before the pandemic. Now, believe it or not, all those colors are made up of little dots. And they kind of run together when you look at DC. The upper one up there is Baltimore. And what you see here is these are people commuting to work. That's a good hard commute, right? Look at the distances. Look at the time that took from people's days. That is also a before picture. Next, please. That's Paris, this is us. Both of us have a beltway. You can kind of see it there if you look real hard. These are density pictures. MSA means Metropolitan Statistical Area. So I'm going to give you some comparisons. Paris has 2.5 times as many people living in their region as we have in ours. We've got 5, they've got 13. 25% of our land area is devoted to streets in DC, rights of way. We favor the car. Not as badly as Detroit, but not too far behind. Although L'Enfant came from Paris, but still we have a lot of streets. Our population density is 9 people per acre. Paris's population density is 80 people per acre. Just to say, we're a sleepy little southern town in comparison, okay? Just know yourself, see yourself as others see you, right? Just so we know who we are. See those numbers there? That's how many jobs we have per acre. See the employment centers? We have edge cities here. You can see Tyson's, you can see Merrifield, you can see Bethesda, you can see Rockville. You know, you could probably work your way around the Beltway. Look at Paris, because that is also their employment density. Their highest density, these dark green areas up there in the middle, their employment density there is 200 jobs per acre. Please look at ours. See, the yellow is over 30. Okay, so what's happening here is that that's a much denser place, and it's much more mixed in use, and it's much less segregated for zoning, right, and for uses. All right, can I see the next slide, please? So this is the zoning map for DC. And you see that there are areas that are not outlined. That's like the mall, as you know, and Rock Creek Park, and the river, and the Anacostia, Potomac River and the Anacostia. And then you see all the pink stuff around there. And that's really in our CBD. And then you see that it gets less and less and less dense as you go further out, right? And all that light yellow stuff, that's all single-family homes out there. And we do have more density along those roads, which are our major avenues throughout the city. So this shows you a little bit about our patterns of development. And that's at the core of how we develop, because developers don't love being rule followers, but we do follow rules to get things done. So please go to the next slide. So this is the before picture. This is the after picture. That's 14th Street, that's 14th Street. It's just different sections of 14th Street, right? This one's a little further out. But what happened is this area got developed in the 2000s, 2010s, and a little bit in the 2020s. And you will note that it's residential. And if I look around this room, I see a lot of people who kind of look like me. And people like you have been moving back into the city. And maybe some people have been moving from their single-family homes into a chic apartment, right? Why? Because it's walkable, because the city has amenities, because it has a lot of great things. I think that's the past, and I think that's the future. There are things that I do not love about this picture. I kind of really like the part on the left that has this lovely walkable area, but I don't think our public realm is as friendly as it could be. And I think COVID taught us a lot of things about that. Next, please. And I'll just say, like, I'm very particular about building design. Emily and Sarah know that, and so does Faith. And so I'm not necessarily showing you the most beautiful pictures, just so you know. And I acknowledge that. Like, that's ugly and that's ugly. But that's offices, that's residential. That's K Street intersection right after Georgetown. It transitions from Georgetown into downtown, and that's downtown. And what's really happening is, the professor was right again. There were big globs of land. And it's very efficient to build the biggest floor plate that you could possibly build and fit as many people in it and, be very productive. And what it leads to is very dark spaces. We also have a height limitation here. So developers said, well, how low a ceiling can I live with to jam in as many floors as possible in the height limit? And so, people who are tall, that becomes very compromising. And so some buildings have been torn down over the years just because the ceilings were too low, because some developers saved a lot of money and put in an 8-foot ceiling, and that's not very nice. And some of them were just too big and too deep. And so there's been residential built. Next, please. So why should anybody come to DC? Why? What makes this a great city? And by the way, I love this city. I have traveled extensively. I love this city. We have great people here. One of the things that's really great and positions us very, very well for the future, and you don't see it much in this room, but there's a lot of diversity in this city. The fact that there is diversity here makes us a magnet for people to invest. It's very important. We have a lot of working women here. It's very important, right? Because those are your workforces of the future. We have great natural resources. I spend a lot of time on an electric bike because I don't like to pedal that much. But we have rivers, parks, outdoor spaces, amazing. The L'Enfant Plan did a great job. Could it be better? Sure it could. And we could have more. We have fantastic universities. We have great hospitals. Oh, that's my 1 minute sign. Okay, I'm almost done. And all the other things that are listed there. Let's go to the next one. I'm almost done. So what do you need? You need vision. And you need incentives for people to do things, for developers to do things. I want you to know that through real estate, 90% of all millionaires in the United States made their wealth through real estate. 90%. That means we're invested in our homes, we're invested in our businesses, we're invested in our buildings. I'll also tell you another thing. I spent 4 years of my life foreclosing on developers for a bank. It was a lousy job. My time is up. It was a lousy job, but let me just say this. We referred to it as a transfer of wealth. It was a time where office buildings didn't make sense. The banks I worked for owned all of the office buildings along the Dulles Toll Road, all of them. We used to joke it was the longest non-contiguous PUD in the DC area. And they all changed hands, all of them, at steep, steep discounts. This is happening now in the city. The banks are owning the buildings. The owners of these buildings don't have the money or the financing or anything to release vacant spaces. It's frozen. Completely frozen. And it will be for a long time. And so, these are all the things we need. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs puts safety right up there, right up front, and certainty, and predictability, and a clear, quantifiable goals. And if you figure those out, and you put the incentives to place, and by the way, Mayor Williams did that before, because he increased the population of this city significantly by setting very clear priorities, very clear incentives that help the city grow. And can that be done? Sure it can. Is it just a downtown issue? No, it's not. It's not. There's office buildings in Chevy Chase that just went back to their lender, right? It's in Bethesda, my office building just went back to a lender, and we're a tenant in it. So it's happening, guys. We're overbuilt for office. People aren't coming back to the office. And by the way, it's really good for women in the workplace, just to say. And so I don't think it's happening. I don't think anybody wants to spend their time in a car, and I don't blame them. And so live near where you work. But you know what we do have is a great big silver tsunami, and people want to live in walkable communities. And they want to live in places that have entertainment, and they want to live with the arts, and they want to live in a beautiful spot, and they want to live near parks, and they want to live near each other, and they want to live near where services are. And that's the future. And by the way, we've had more babies in my office than you can shake a stick at. And so that means that there's a lot of new Washingtonians coming as well. And so I have a message of joy for you, which is, hey, this is a time of change. But a time of change is a time of opportunity, right? And so I think we need to get to work, put the incentives in place, and get going.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Vicki. I always thought I was I was a baby boomer, but now I know that I'm part of the silver tsunami, so. Okay, immediately after the next presentation, we will move into panel discussion. Carol Ayton will be the moderator. She is a longtime Committee of 100 member, trustee, and co-chairs our planning subcommittee. Okay, the last speaker is Nancy MacWood. Nancy currently serves as vice chair of the Committee of 100, but of particular note in the context of this discussion is her in-depth familiarity with zoning rules, the comprehensive plan, and the DC budget. As a longtime member of the Committee of 100 on the Federal City, as well as a DC resident and activist, Nancy will provide perspective on transforming the area we traditionally think of as downtown. Nancy.
Thank you all. Okay, last speaker. The title of this event is Creating a More Vibrant Downtown. Vibrant's a good word for describing an atmosphere, a place full of life, but I think it underestimates what we have and what our goals should be for Central Washington. While those of us who live here may take it for granted, Washington, D.C. is unparalleled in city planning. L'Enfant, influenced by Versailles and living in Paris, created a new city formed with circles and radiating avenues filled between with orthogonal east-west and north-south street grid. Over 100 years later, the Mellon Commission restored much of his grand vision by redesigning the mall, refining monumental core, and planning a park system that remains today. The physical shape of the city was meant to be beautiful for sure, but it was also intended to symbolize our republic, with the Capitol, where elected representatives of the people preside, located on high ground, and a broad ceremonial avenue connecting it to the home of the elected president of the republic. L'Enfant's original vision of creating vistas, views, public spaces, and connections continues to inspire symbols of our democracy, as evidenced by Mayor Bowser in 2020, using 16th Street, which connects to the White House through Lafayette Park, as the canvas for the permanent Black Lives Matter mural. We are a city that has an intentional scale and design that has its antecedents in L'Enfant's vision for how our nation's capital city should feel and look, which is carried forward with the Height of Buildings Act safeguards. Our city provides an urban experience that still captivates and inspires Americans and worldwide visitors. But while Washington has evolved with discipline, we've made mistakes, often in following trends like urban renewal. When we consider revisioning an area that borders a monumental core and that to many people is inseparable to the physical manifestation of our democracy, we should be mindful of multiple goals. I share this history of the evolution of our city because it should frame our discussion about how to bounce back from the 3-year impact of the pandemic and remind us that we as residents of DC have committed to sets of goals and principles found in the comprehensive plan that are relevant to envisioning downtown as a group of neighborhoods. For the Committee of 100, our message is simple. We should honor what makes our city exceptional and what symbolizes our democracy, and we should be guided by our values as a city in revitalizing downtown. Our values as a city are many, but several are being challenged as seemingly inconsistent with restoring the vitality of downtown. Foremost is the failure to require affordable housing to the vision. This is almost inconceivable, except that our leaders have allowed the Office of Planning and Zoning Commission to seal off downtown from the citywide requirement for years. The plan for downtown includes significant investments, both in improving parks and infrastructure and in foregoing a portion of commercial tax revenues for potentially decades. Lack of public investment has been documented to presage the deterioration of many DC neighborhoods, and conversely, renewed public investment is often associated with the introduction of gentrification and displacement of jobs, housing, and culture. Both disinvestment and investment have led to bad outcomes for many Black and brown households and low-income residents. It doesn't have to be that way. We can tie public investment to achieving our goals for a diverse and inclusive city. There is no reason to exempt downtown from these goals. As we consider and the council ponders the historic fiscal year 25 budget proposal from the mayor that includes unprecedented investments in downtown, we must not be silent. We must show that in the nation's capital, public investment fosters inclusivity and facilitates diversity. What does this mean? For too long, downtown housing development has been exempted from contributing to the production of new affordable housing except in small areas. Predictably, we've seen a decrease in the Black population downtown. Now that the city wants to boost housing by converting vacant and underutilized office space with public investment in the form of tax abatements and infrastructure improvements, it is essential that we benefit everyone and restore diversity downtown. But that isn't what we are doing. The recently approved downtown tax abatement permits 92% of the new housing to be market rate, which will likely mean expensive, very expensive, or luxury prices. The mayor wants to house 15,000 residents in 5 years and 6 times that amount long-term. She wants to create new neighborhoods for these residents and visitors with more cultural venues, more entertainment opportunities, more jobs and educational possibilities, and more green space. All of that is good, but we aren't planning to make these areas racially and economically inclusive neighborhoods. This is when the pretty picture falls apart. The only provision for affordable housing is through the tax abatement, and the requirement is minimal. 10% set aside for households with incomes up to 60%, which is $68,000 for a family of 2, or 18% at 80% MFI, which is $91,000 for a 2-person household. And the affordability requirement sunsets in 20 years. It is not in perpetuity. Why aren't these units protected in perpetuity, and why aren't we modeling the requirement on the public land requirement of 30% affordable housing set aside? And why aren't we making this a requirement for every project producing 10 or more units of housing, whether a tax abatement is part of the picture or not? In addition to not requiring affordable housing downtown, except in exchange for an up to 20-year tax abatement, the tax abatement program sidelines one of our traditional job creators for DC residents, the First Source Agreement Program. None of the new construction being encouraged downtown will require DC hiring, even though DC has over 13% of residents living below poverty. Many of these residents can and want to work. 25% of the residents over 25 have high school diplomas. but only 18% work part-time or part of the year, and over 33% did not work at all in the past 12 months. The tax program would re-engage FirstSource during operations, but that will involve many fewer jobs and uncertain educational requirements. The most impactful job opportunities are during construction. The discussion about how to bring back downtown must have context. We must think about how we got here and what we want our legacy to be. We can expand the opportunities to leverage public funds to create downtown neighborhoods that are models of equity. We can remember that there are links between downtown commercial revenues and the capacity of the city to meet the needs of struggling residents and families. And we must think about the long-lasting impact of how we meet today's challenges. I look forward to exploring with this eminent panel and all of you how we use the opportunity presented to us to enhance our home and the nation's capital. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. While people are getting settled here, I point out again that we will have a question and answer period after this moderated discussion among the panelists. People that want to ask questions should line up behind the microphone there in the middle of the room. Once again, during the question and answer period, please keep your questions brief. Thank you. Carol?
Thank you. So, a lot to think about here and where to start. I think the first question that I'd kind of like to ask you all to comment on is, there seems to be a pattern that involves basically waiting it out until things change, that you have to get through this cycle and make the adjustments. And we're trying to incentivize it so that we can make that, speed up that, I think. And I'm wondering if you all could sort of comment on whether tax abatements and tax credits in the face of limited demand are really going to make a difference, and is anybody going to lend money for projects like this? So maybe start with Vicki and then Gerren and then John.
When developers develop property, we borrow between 50 and 75% of the entire sources from lenders. And then we put the other piece in, we get the equity from institutions that the professor alluded to, and then the developer typically puts in 5 or 10%. We've done some weird things during COVID in DC that make that equation very difficult. We decided to close our eviction courts for 4 years. Eviction courts. Which means that people figured that out over the 4-year period and ended up paying maybe 70% of residents paid their rent and the other 30 didn't at all for years. Still not. Still working through the backlog. That would make residential lenders very uncomfortable because we write in our underwriting a 3% delinquency rate, and it's been 30. So also a great transfer of wealth away from developers into people, not low-income people, just people, rich people, poor people, people. That's one thing. Second thing that's happened is that we have a very rising crime rate and we have no prosecutions, or very few. And so it's not uncommon for people to steal from retail locations. And so many large chains, including groceries, drugstores, small businesses, etc., have blackballed this city because we choose not to enforce crime. You have to steal $450 from CVS before you're eligible for prosecution. I think that's 200 candy bars. It's a lot. So that's a problem. You're not going to see more retail. And I think for For office buildings, when you have a 20% vacancy rate, nobody can underwrite that. Nobody. Actually, the only thing that makes sense in the city right now is affordable housing. Right? So, because we use different resources, and the tax abatement is not the main resource that we use. It's an important resource, but we use low-income housing tax credits, and we use your tax money through the Housing Trust Fund, which has gone way down because there's less tax revenue. So, so less tax credit development can happen. So I think we have to address those issues, which go directly to safety, and how we enforce our laws with generally middle-class values before we can reset the table for our city. And on the other hand, we're doing gangbusters up at Walter Reed because it's a bit of a new neighborhood, right? And so it helps to have that as a community, and more outlying areas are helped. But it's a very, very difficult precedent that's been set over the last 4 years, and the pendulum swings one way, and the pendulum has to swing a little bit more back to middle here before a developer can do anything. However, if you have a vacant or abandoned property in this city, and the nifty thing about this city is it's a city, county, and state all in one. It's a one-stop shop. That's a really nice thing. It's very powerful. I will just say to you, I have a restaurant in Georgetown, and it had a fire, and a part of it burned, and 2 weeks afterward, I got a tax assessment for 5 times the tax I had been paying before for my real estate taxes, 2 weeks after my fire. 5 times, because it was a vacant and abandoned building. I had filed all of my paperwork correctly and got that undone, so don't worry about it. But it's a hell of an incentive for a bank, because all of a sudden, they're paying, in essence, not 1% of their property value in taxes a year, which is about what taxes are for real estate taxes, but 10%. And that is not sustainable. And so when the buildings go back to the lender, and the lender has to pay more in taxes, they are very incentivized to turn that property over just as fast as they possibly can, which goes to the transfer of wealth and starting over by lowering the basis. And the building's no longer worth $200 a foot, it's worth $30 a foot, overnight. And that's how you reset the table and you regain the land to make the next thing feasible. That's how it works, in my opinion.
Would either one of you like to comment on that?
I always enjoy being on panels with you, Vicki, and audiences. You have such great insights and knowledge and expertise. So I'm as much a student here as I am feeling like I deserve to be on a panel of experts here. One thing I just want to make a nod to really quickly. You asked the question of should we be waiting or sort of sitting around and waiting and questioning the demand. I want to push back a little bit on just the demand part and the waiting part. So there are actively a number of projects right now that are under construction in downtown. 4 projects that have delivered already in terms of office to residential conversion. 3 where shovels are in ground right now. Actually doing a tour tomorrow at 1313 L Street Northwest, which Willow Bridge is doing. And they actually are planning first move-in is taking place mid-June, and they've have a record-setting number of folks who've applied to be in that building once it's complete. So I do think there is some demand there, and when I think about the affordable housing crisis in this city and the challenge around affordability, I think one of the ways that we begin to solve that, you solve the affordable housing crisis by building more housing and increasing supply. And I think at all levels we need to have more supply on the market, and I think in particular, really thinking about those middle income ranges as well that tend to get priced out. I have a number of friends and folks who I know who are increasingly concerned about the worries of being priced out of this city. And so I'm really sensitive to sort of the nature of that. And I think, in terms of how you make more housing conversions happen in downtown specifically, I do think that the abatements, the tax freezes, the incentive programs, those things help as signal shifters. In some cases, they help certain projects pencil out where they can actually start moving. We have 11 projects that were announced and are sort of in this holding pattern of trying to figure out the financial model that's going to work, and can they find someone willing to underwrite. And we want to make sure that some of those things can move forward, because that catalyzes other positive changes in the neighborhood. So I do think there's room for that. I don't think we can afford to sit and wait and hope that it bottoms out further, or hope that things get worse. Some of it may happen on its own, and market conditions are going to be what market conditions are. But I think we have a responsibility and a duty as a government to try to make those strategic investments wherever possible.
I was raised Scottish Presbyterian, and we believe in redemption through suffering. So I think there's a lot more suffering to go. I think that we haven't reached anywhere close to the bottom. I think there's a number of people holding on to the properties. There's a sense in which people can't quite believe that it's going to go further down, and it will. There's going to be a massive devalorization. My worry about the housing is obviously clearly the issues of affordability, but also specifically for a kind of middle-income group. Washington, D.C., the politics are about either the kind of wealthy or an underclass, and the kind of middle group kind of lose out. And they're going to lose out because if you have office to housing conversion and then it's on the private market, if anyone's checked, and this is a elderly population, you're all probably sitting on no mortgages or 2.5 mortgages. But if you're a new household looking for a mortgage, it's 6.5%. It's suddenly become incredibly expensive. And that's for new households. Older people, I get the idea, older people will come to the city, but that's older rich people. They will have sold off their housing and they can come and don't need a mortgage. But if you will need a mortgage to buy a house in Washington, D.C. now, you're effectively being priced out. And I think that is a worry. You're losing that middle. The big growth of the last 20 years has been young people, middle-income people bringing vitality, to the kind of city, and they're going to have a harder time. And that's going to affect kind of cultural buoyancy, economic vitality. So I worry about that, in a sense. So I definitely take the point about equity issues for revising downtown, but the equity also has to include those who are younger and less affluent, but not quite really poor. And they tend not to get much of a voice, I think, in Washington, D.C.
I think my concern about the tax abatement is exactly what you're talking about, is that there are no links in the tax abatement, there are no conditions in the tax abatement to ensure that we are going to get those middle income people, that we are providing housing for them. We all know that converting office space to residential is not going to be easy. It's not a logical thing to think that you can take the floor plan of an office building, a large office building, and convert it easily to residential. The mayor has said we need 7 million square feet of new residential to accommodate the 15,000 new residents. We've got 19 to 20 million square feet of vacant office space. How are we going to fill that? And are these tax abatements, why aren't there more conditions attached to them? Make sure that we get the type of community and neighborhood and employment base that we want if we really want a vital and vibrant downtown, because otherwise we're going to have very expensive residential housing, and we all know who is going to be able to afford to live there, and it's not most of us, and not my children.
Just a question, is there anything in the, it's a real question, not a rhetorical question, is there any tools in the abatement toolkit that we can use to get a range of income, and so she can...
It's not there now. It's not...
Well, actually, I will say, I thought there were requirements there, and I'm not an expert in the details there, and I know we had someone here from DEMPED.
Affordable housing.
I thought there was a 10 and an 18%, so 60% AMI and 80% AMI, which I don't remember the exact specifics, so please don't quote me on this, but there are some guardrails.
There's some, but it's minimal.
So let's
And it's not, doesn't require family housing or anything like that.
Let's look at the whole spectrum. We got 400,000 people who live in DC. 190,000 are renters and the rest are homeowners. The average income, I don't think it's 600. Maybe it's 500.
700,000? 700,000.
No. It went down after COVID. 675. Fine.
Sold.
How many rental units are there?
It's about 50-50.
It's about 50-50. So there's 300,000 rental units. I just looked up on the list how many tax credit rentals are in the city. Yeah. How many?
I don't know, but it's
How many tax?
It's about 30. It's about 35,000. Just what I saw. So 10% across the city of rentals. Rental apartments generally serve households who make 85 to 150% of median. So you have a gap, just as everybody's been saying, between the 60% that's the max for the tax credits generally, and the 85%. That's the missing middle. Doesn't exist. And so those are people who are relegated to older, less good product or whatever, less amenitized, et cetera. So I would also say one thing about this city, and that is this city produces more affordable housing than many states in this nation, just so you know. And the housing trust fund that we have is significantly larger than just about any city in the nation by a lot. We produce a lot of affordable housing. My company produces, owns, operates a lot of affordable housing in this city and elsewhere. So I do think that downtown should absolutely have an affordability requirement. If they can have 15% affordable housing out at Avenel, and in every development over 50 units in Montgomery County, and they've had that in place for 50 years, just so we're all on the same page, you can do that. And it affects land value, and it affects construction costs, and so does our CBE requirement when you take city money, and so does our first source requirement. And it adds, get this, to employ DC companies and to employ DC residents, demonstrated it adds 20% to the cost of the project. And it makes you 20% less desirable as a jurisdiction than the surrounding jurisdictions, with the exception of Montgomery County, because they're at 15. And so there are balances in all of these things, and I would have said it's very important to see yourselves as others see you, and how that balance works.
I want to start inviting questions and comments, so if people want to come up, but I would like to sort of just throw another thought kind of out there, since we're sort of in the area of residential. The way the incentives are structured, it's pretty much developer choice. I mean, they just pick a project and apply, and so there's no creating a community. It's maybe one here and one there and whatever. One thing about the 13L or whatever the address is it's right next to DuPont Circle. So I mean, there is like a community there. So how can you shape something that is more intentional, I guess, is what I'm saying. It just seems quite random. Is the implementation plan that's still coming in May? Maybe.
That's a really great point. And it's actually something we heard a lot from stakeholders throughout the Downtown Action Plan process. Well, one thing, just to offer one caveat, there is sort of a defined boundary in which it can take place. So there is sort of some level of guardrail. The map is fairly wide. I mean, it covers a broad swath of downtown. But I think some of the initial thinking and really logic behind it is that where we'll probably first see the most conversion activity are going to be in the places that are already on the periphery of other residential development. So if you think about some of the really significant residential development that's happened along the north of Massachusetts Avenue corridors, really stretching from northeast all the way up northwest, around Logan Circle, DuPont Circle, you have some of this natural activity already, and so you may see some that sort of cluster on the fringes of that. Where you may start to see some of the more randomized work that's happening, that's where I mentioned really briefly in our abbreviated presentation around our focus on these central nodes and neighborhood catalyst areas, where we believe you'll have some residential development that will take place there, but you need to make sure that you have those other residential serving amenities that are in close proximity. So that's where adding the additional improvements to public realm, having great parks, having the grocery store, sort of the types of amenities that you know people need, access and proximity to schools and libraries and dry cleaners and et cetera. So some of that will come and is part of the planning process and ongoing implementation work that will take place. But we have to be sensitive to that because the randomized throw a building here, throw a building there, that's not a sustainable long-term growth strategy that's going to bring about the reimagined downtown that we need.
One of the things I often felt that actually Washington has a very poor planning department. In a sense, it's as unimaginative for years. You know, any developer could get a square office block, and yeah, that's fine. And there wasn't much use of, lots of cities around America and around the world have used what they call planning gain. We will, you know, we'll allow you to develop, but you need to give the community something in return. That's not really been leveraged much in Washington, D.C. It didn't have a planning department for years, obviously, because it was under congressional authority. And people just seemed to be glad that we could get any development. It seemed like a sort of inferiority complex. For a great city, it had an inferiority complex about how it related to developers. It's somehow or other, thank goodness that you want to develop, just go for it. So we have a poor quality of housing, office stock, very little planning gain. And that's something that you could choose to change quite dramatically.
To piggyback on that a little bit, I do think some of the unique challenges here in DC with the Height Act and some of the other factors that can make it difficult to make projects make financial sense also offers sort of a different sort of pressure that other cities just don't struggle with. And so you miss out on some of the uniqueness of having those building cutouts with the great courtyards and sort of green spaces around it that help add to that vibrancy. I think there's now a realization that we're going to have to think differently and think about the future in a completely different way where you're going to have that as part of your projects. And some of that has happened already. When I look at City Center and the intentionality around having public spaces and plazas and ongoing community events and things that are open amenities to those who want to experience them, I think that's important in future planning. And then we have
the Height Act, I might add.
Right, exactly. So it's doable, but you
Yes,
have to be intentional around it. So.
It goes back to what the city was requiring.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then I will just say, too, there are a number of catalytic site opportunities that we think still exist when you think about the future of the FBI site. If that deal moves forward and they move out of that space and there's real interest in what the future of that space can be, you have the potential to really rethink almost an entire new neighborhood within a huge city block and parcel, and then that begins to attract other types of development on the periphery of that. So I think there's a path forward, but we are just in the sort of early stages of beginning to see the vision of that. I'll stop talking because I see a line of folks wanting to ask questions. So.
I want to say one
Yes,
thing.
sorry.
Just
Loretta,
one
go.
quick thing. And that is, I actually think we have the most granular planning process possible because it starts with our ANCs, our advisory neighborhood commissions. And boy, oh boy, did we get information on that for Walter Reed.
They're
And
totally reactive. They don't do anything planning.
all right.
Okay.
I would have said the plan that we implemented at Walter Reed was created
You did.
by our community.
That's because you asked.
But it had a plan that was created.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And you actually followed the small area plan.
Yes.
Surprise.
Yeah.
Shocker.
Well, I actually have two things, and what you just,
Yeah, put it close
okay.
to your mouth because it doesn't.
hello.
Yes.
Well, I first wanted to respond to Mr. Price because I really appreciated what you said, and you were saying all the things I got up here to say mostly, but that is, you can't just build or redo a commercial building into residential without providing all of the things that people that live in a place need. A dry cleaner, a market for food, and other things of those that you mentioned. So I was going to say that as well, and also was going to say that for myself, I live in a big house in Tacoma, an historic neighborhood that I love, very close to Walter Reed, and I do want to address Walter Reed in a minute, in a nice way, not a bad. She and I have sparred on some things, but you're doing good. No, but for me in my home, I am a recent widow, and I have other friends like me who live in big homes. We have a little widows group in my neighborhood, and there's another person I think in here who's one of them. And we are all struggling with what we do next. I have a large house with 3,500 square feet of livable space. I don't want to move into a 600 square foot apartment. And yet what seems to be being built, I would say the maximum in our community, I do want to ask if there's anything at Walter Reed that's bigger, that's not, I want to rent. I do not want to buy. I'm too old to have to build more equity again. I want to take the equity out and use it. Then that would mean selling my house and finding some place to rent. And I started to look, and I'm finding the stuff they're building now, 1 and 2 bedrooms, not even a den in there. I have relatives I want to come visit. So that's a part of the problem too. If you're going to modify these commercial spaces, then maybe you ought to think about your clientele, and part of that clientele, yes, should be affordable. But it also be for people like me who could afford a bigger place and want a bigger place and be happy to live downtown. That would be fun. There's a lot of amenities down here, and I love it. So, think about that as well. As far as Walter Reed, I am concerned about, making sure that I was on that planning too, and I participated in all that planning that went on, and the meetings after meetings after meetings. And I can tell you, our ANC.
There's a long line
Okay.
behind you.
Okay, all right. You can just respond to me. I'm not so much asking a question as just pontificating. But anyway, that Walter Reed is looking good, and I think it, frankly, will increase the value of our homes. So I might wait a few years before I sell mine.
We've got rental product for you. Come on down.
Yeah, that was my question
Come
for
on.
you. Are there any apartments for rent, not to buy, I don't want to buy, but to rent that at
says
least
yes.
have, say, 1,200 to 1,500 square feet?
We've got 1,200 square feet, and if you wanted to buy, you could come in at 15. Well, then come for 12
Hey, Cash.
for rental. 12.
The key to revitalizing downtown is to bring people down there. We've heard from the official plans, they list 5 points and 3 points and so on, but there isn't enough focus on actually bringing people. If there were people living down here, commerce would thrive and they would return. So we need a place where people can live, and that would be the affordable housing part, because we have a glut of housing. So I would like to ask you directly, what do you think of converting the Harrington Hotel, which recently closed? It's right downtown, to be an exciting place to live. If you would comment on that, please.
I think it's a great idea.
I want to say something about floor plates, just so you all hear it the way we do. Contractors say, well, why do you want to rehab this office building and turn it into residential, when for $5 million you can tear it down and start again? It's not a bad idea, just honestly, like you sit there and go, oh, which way is it better? A hotel typically has a different floor plate. It has a much narrower floor plate than offices are like this, residential is like this, hotels are like this. That's how the floor plates go. And so they may not be that good to do inside of each other unless it's something very special.
Can I say one thing really quick just for the prior question, and I want to make sure we get to everybody. I did not do justice to the Downtown Action Plan. And again, not to sound like a broken record or commercial, reimaginedowntowndc.com, you can get access to the full plan. You're exactly right about the goal of bringing people downtown. I'm sorry, I don't see the person who asked the question anymore. I'm not sure if he's still in the room. But you're absolutely right. That is a huge part of the solution. One of the things that we recommend as part of that 5-year investment strategy is about $80 million worth of things that are focused on bringing people by way of visitors and really thinking about public realm improvements, leaning into the park spaces and green spaces that attract people. We've seen some great successes in the downtown core with the revitalization of Franklin Park in the central part of downtown. And so I think that's one element of that. We're really encouraged by some of the mayor's proposed budget elements this year that includes an awesome festival fund that would help us to bring more grand, world-class festivals and activities to downtown DC, as well as smaller scale events and activities that we can enhance and improve, like our downtown holiday market on F Street, and other things that help to activate our vacant retail spaces. There was an awesome event just earlier this week announcing the new pop-up permit program being run through Director Brian Hanlon at the Department of Buildings that really helps to, in 15 days or less, bring anyone who wants to do a creative, innovative, activation of a ground floor retail space. They can get their permit in 15 days to start making those things happen. Those are the kinds of things, short-term and long-term, they're going to help address some of those challenges and bring people in droves to downtown. And that's what we need in addition to some of the development that's more longer term.
Hello, how's everybody doing this evening? My name is Solomon. I am a local community activist, active here since the late 90s, where I helped with some ballot initiatives like treatment instead of jail for first-time and nonviolent offenders. I was one of the campaign managers on that, as well as medical marijuana. Mainly, I try to focus, as well as I raise money and done some private work with think tanks as well, as work in hospitality and tourism. And I am currently working on some plans that I'm going in between all the different decision makers, and you can check out my podcast on Spotify or Apple's podcast under @McGrade, ATMAGRADE. But I noticed that almost all the residents in all the wards, when I show one of my public policy pieces here called Garden in the City, it's where you kind of have public-private zones on the outside that can beautify as well as add value to the property and health to the individuals, where you have outdoor grows with aeroponics, aquaponics, where you can grow food, vegetables, fruit, and actually have aquatic life, like you have fountains, but just at a lower cost, a higher outcome, and actually when you own a building, you probably could make as much money with having your own kind of grocery store growing on top of the roof, lowering your taxes with some solar panels. And I just wanted to ask the panel one quick question. How often do you get a chance to talk to the decision makers at the council, the mayor's office? Do you attend any of the events? Are you planning to, when this forum is done, like kind of like present this to any of the decision makers? Anybody can answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I can say the Downtown Action Plan work that we've been engaged in has been in direct partnership with many of the city's officials, working really closely with the mayor, the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning Economic Development. Major shout out to Deputy Mayor Nina Albert, who I think has been really just a tremendous lightning rod of support and new energy in sort of the thinking around how we not just focus on downtown's comeback, but really focus on the city's comeback. So we're really encouraged by her leadership. And I will also say, as part of the Downtown Action Plan, we met with all 13 members of the DC Council, hearing what their priorities were, understanding where they see value to the story of downtown's recovery and how that benefits the entire city.
I'm not sure if responding to your comments, because I think I'm going deaf, to be honest. But one thing is that I do think it needs to be it's almost as if we want to kind of replace one form of formal urbanism with another form of formal urbanism. And if you look at cities around the world that have had bigger challenges, often the response has been an encouragement of the informal, a sort of cultural, creative economy. I do work in Colombia, and street vending is huge, is big. I would like to see more street vending in DC, more building on the creative potential of the local population. We have wonderful music, rap, I don't see any of that in any plans for downtown. I don't seem to see that, unless I should go to the website, right? If I go to the website, reimagine downtown. But anyway, I think it's, the experiences from elsewhere is that you're not going to, replace one big narrative. Let's build as many boring office blocks and make a ton of money as possible, with another one. Let's convert office blocks for rich people or whatever. It's like simple narratives. I'd like to see much more building on the sorts of local cultures that we have, the creativity of ordinary people in the city. How do we build that up in a way? Encouraging grants for all kinds of artistic endeavors, a sort of whole notion of a 24-hour convivial city. It may not solve all the problem. I don't think there is a magic bullet, but I do think there is some room for some imaginative thinking of how we develop the huge potential we have for people who live in this city and their cultural and creativity.
I agree with that.
In response to the question about whether we're talking to council members and sharing our views and approaches, I can say for the Committee of 100, we do that constantly. We testify at the council on legislation, on policy, on oversight of the different agencies and the departments, on the budget. We've started to testify on behalf of on the budget, as well as we have dialogues with individual council members. So that's really what we're all about.
I thought the gentleman also asked a question about urban agriculture. And I would just like to say, we got a lot of underground parking garages that might not have any cars in them in the future. And that is an urban agriculture venue that you could absolutely do. It's a little outside the box, but people are talking about it, so maybe that's one of the things that's coming. Activation at Walter Reed, we got 100 events per year. The Capitol Riverfront bid, same thing. All the developers and all the owners contribute. Southwest bid, same thing. They all contribute. Downtown bid, same thing. Georgetown bid, same thing. And so these business improvement districts, which is banding together of the property owners to activate our public great spaces, our parks, our venues with arts. We have lots of arts programs at Walter Reed. Performing arts, creative arts, you name it. We're doing it, and we're doing it to create great places, which drives our rents and sales prices and the values of the homes of the people around us.
We have a lot of people in line here and not much time because we want to get to the refreshments, so please.
I just wanted to say that a couple of days ago in the Washington Business Journal, Shalom Baranes, published an article that I thought was really interesting, saying that the federal government should not be sort of trying to dump its portfolio of office buildings without considering the fact that the ones built before World War II in particular have the kind of floor plates that really lend themselves to residential redevelopment. And he puts forth the idea that the government might go even further, and rather than disposing of these buildings in today's fire sale climate, consider long-term leases to housing providers who would commit to renovating them for residential uses. And the government might initially subsidize the cost of the ground leases, and then at the end of 60 or 99-year ground leases, the government would have the option of reclaiming the buildings for whatever it deems appropriate. So I wondered what the panelists think of that idea.
He's right. That's exactly the model for Walter Reed. It's the model for almost all of the large developments in DC that have land that's publicly owned. 99-year ground lease, Metro's been doing it for 30 years. Local jurisdictions have been doing it. It comes with all kinds of bells and whistles of CBE and First Source and everything you can imagine. And it works. It works really well. And so, yes, he's 100% correct. And I do not think that the federal workforce, where the average age is 54 years old, is A, going to grow. I think it's going to shrink. a lot, and you're not coming back to work here. And so you ought to think about the plans, and the only fear is, and it's one of the reasons why Nina is such a great deputy mayor, is because she used to be the commissioner of buildings for the GSA. And so she's got a really good nexus. So we have a great deputy mayor for economic development.
I just wanted to add on to that, which is, in particular, the pre-war buildings are the ones with the appropriate floor plates versus the ones built afterwards that have the deep floor plates. And these older buildings have windows that open and all that sort of thing. But for me, the additional attraction is that it will keep some of the historic architecture, so we won't have just one era, which is what makes a city so unurban.
Hi, I had a question about affordable housing. Do we really want affordable housing? I read that there were 53 units of affordable housing in Ward 3, 5,733 units of affordable housing in Ward 8. In our heart of hearts, do we want affordable housing?
We're building the 93 units in Ward 3 right now. It's the only development in Ward 3, and it's seniors housing. And the city's working very hard to get additional affordable housing dispersed. I personally am very partial to the model in Montgomery County that requires it to be a percentage of every single development and be integrated. And I think it makes an awful lot of sense to do that. On the other hand, the low-income housing tax credit financing model is the most predominantly used one in the United States because you can produce more units quicker. And that's important if you're trying to house people. And so you're not reliant on market forces as much. You can do more quicker. But do I believe in concentration of affordable housing? No, I don't, because we call those ghettos. And I don't think that that's a very good idea. And we've all experienced that over time. And so it is a good time to integrate people in all communities. And I'll just give a big shout out to all of the neighbors of Walter Reed out here, because they're the ones who insisted that 20% of the housing at Walter Reed should be affordable. They are. And so good for you and good for all of us.
And here's Faith, who was one of the people. How we've been doing this is that we are using LIHTC, and we are using the Housing Production Trust Fund, but that money is almost, majority of that money is going towards 5, 7, and 8, where there is already ghettos, if you will. There are predominantly lower income people in those. And those funds are not being used in places like Ward 3 and other areas of the city that are called high opportunity areas. And so the only vehicle for getting affordable housing, where that gentleman just talked about, Ward 3, for example, is through the inclusionary zoning program, which is private development.
And it's a pittance.
And it is just like what's being proposed for downtown. It's 10%.
It's both. You have to have a full toolbox full of tools. You can't just rely on one tool. Like, you're not going to hammer in a nail with the screwdriver. You need every resource available, and more than that, you'll need a vision and a plan. And when you do that, then you can pick the right tools to implement the vision and plan and incentivize it.
Plan. Yes, that didn't turn out too well, and the Wisconsin Avenue Framework Plan is no model for that. So we have 3 more people, and then we need to keep it brief because we are over our time. Faith.
Okay. I'm wondering what kind of vision or plan we can really count on moving forward to radically change the wide, very wide income gap in the city. Is 15% affordable housing, and what is affordable housing? Is it 80% MFI? Mostly. Does it reach down further, deeper? 60? What can we do? This seems to be a persistent wide income gap. How do we make really significant changes in that? What sorts of tools, affordable housing and creative arts, et cetera? What can we do?
I have ideas on that. So the question is, what can you do to shrink the widening of the income gap? And the answer is, create the incentives for it. And there's a lot of people who are experts in that realm and can talk through the incentives. Like, how do you grow a family's wealth? Well, most of us in the United States, our wealth is in our homes. So maybe you should grow home ownership programs. That's one. Most of us come up in the world through education. So maybe that's one. And there's, everybody reads when, there are people who are working on this, but I think it's a really big issue. And I do think that neighborhoods like yours that are inclusive and that help people come up, I think that's a really good thing. And I'll just say this, like Section 8 housing, the less money you make, the less rent you pay. Like maybe that's not a good incentive. Just saying, like that might not be a good idea. Maybe there's a way to do that better. It's a nice safety net, but it's not necessarily a thing that says, hey, let's make more money, or for every dollar extra that you make, we're going to put this money aside for you in your own little housing trust fund so you can amalgamate a down payment for a home. Like all of a sudden that changes the incentives, right? So there are so many ideas out there of how to incentivize income growth that are doable, in my opinion.
I think we got to keep in mind, though, that a lot of the recipients of Section 8 housing, for example, or our local rent supplement housing, are people who are disabled, people who are seniors and on fixed incomes. It is not, I don't think we want to leave the impression that our rent subsidy programs are creating a disincentive for people to work, because I don't believe that's true.
Okay, so 2 more brief questions.
These are questions. Okay, I have 2 questions. Oh, okay, I have 2 questions. And it follows on just what you were saying and what she was saying too. There's all this talk about more housing. What about the jobs? Have you been talking more about those, or perhaps writing more about the jobs and what the jobs will be? That they have to be really actual jobs, jobs that can support themselves as jobs and then support the people who have the jobs. And so that's very important, especially if we're talking about bringing in thousands of people. You know, we really need to have that, and not just have incentives for the jobs. They need to have the jobs be there. That's my first. The second one is affordable housing. It's the talk now. And when I hear that, there's a whole range, a spectrum of what affordable housing is. Can you please explain, when you're talking in discussions, explain what you mean, where you mean help with people wanting to buy when they need a down payment assistance like after World War II, whether it's workforce people who need help, whether it's people who are disabled, or they can't, or elderly, or people who just have no job where they just need housing, period. And so that really is important, because when you talk that way without being clear, I think you lose a lot of people out there who just are saying, well, this is my interpretation of what you mean, and it may not be correct. So how do you want to tie the work to affordable housing?
When we talk about affordable housing, we follow HUD regulations. There are different tranches of affordable housing. The low-income housing tax credit program serves up to 60% of area median income. area median income for this area is $152,000 a year for a family of 4. If you're a family of 3, it's 90% of that. If you're a family of 2, it's 80%. And if you're a family of 1, it's 70%. So you can do the math, and it's a matrix, right, depending on your household size. That's 100% of median is at $152,000. So 50% of median is 70, whatever it is, $76,000, okay? That is considered 50% of median per HUD terminology, not Vicki's terminology, is very low income. So a family of 4 making under $76,000 is considered very low. For 30% of median, which is a HUD tranche, that's very, very low. It's a very scientific way they call this. 30% of median. That's people, family of 4, under $50,000 a year. You can do the math in the tranches. We have a set of tools that comes with full tax abatement in DC, and it comes with equity and other financing and housing trust fund financing for anybody who's under 60%. And there are a lot of people, and there's never enough of that kind of housing. Never enough.
Now, does that mean housing that is being provided to these people, that they're not paying any rent?
The litmus test in the United States is that you should, in a perfect world, be paying 30% of your income for rent. Many people pay 50% of their income for rent or more. And so the ideal when they size the rents in these programs is to size it, in the LIHTC program, it's so that you're sized to pay about 35% of your income towards rent. And the rents are reduced and restricted to people within those income ranges.
We have so many different affordable housing programs. So it is, I take your point, and I agree with you. It is very hard for people to understand what are we really talking about when we're talking about affordable housing. How do you define it? Because it depends on what program you're talking about, how it gets defined. And the problem in the district with using the HUD regional median family income is that it includes Fairfax, Virginia. It includes areas outside of the district, and they drive up the income. The median family income for a Black family in the district is about $54,000. I mean, it is out of whack. We could choose, except for federal money, when we're distributing our local funds, we could use the district's median income as our base for how we're going to distribute our funds for affordable housing programs. When we're using federal money, we have to use the HUD median family for the region. So that is one of the issues. When it comes to jobs, the vast majority of our jobs, and this has been true for a long time, the vast majority of our jobs require a college degree, if not an advanced degree. And from what I have read about the comeback plan for downtown, the jobs that are being incentivized are those that will require the same sort of educational attainment. So we aren't creating jobs, and particularly when we don't use first source, which is the linchpin to the construction jobs for DC residents. When we don't require that's a whole avenue of jobs that we're not really pursuing. But it is a problem in the district because the jobs for people who have less education than a college degree are being developed outside the city.
Last thing, I just might say this one last thing. No, it's that you bring up the key point is that we need the jobs, and we don't need college-educated jobs. We need jobs in the city. And that should, I think, should be one of the major things.
But for everybody.
Yeah. I know we're short on time. I do want to push back a little bit, like in terms of the job goals that were set in the mayor's comeback plan. It is around looking at high growth sectors, and one of which is tech, and many tech careers don't actually require a college degree. And so there's a lot of conversation around that now and making sure that that's part of the equitable journey. I think the other piece is around small business investment and development. There's some specific investments being proposed now that would almost double the number of minority-owned businesses that we have here in the district, and those are traditionally known, and research shows generate jobs, keep revenue generated in our communities, and so I think that's an important part of the strategy as well. So I just wanted to add that caveat.
I'm trying to think. There's a whole series of new museums slated for the district area. There's obviously the Museum of the Latino, Women's Museum, Navy Museum, Pentagon 9/11 Museum, Office of Strategic Service Museums. I've all thought about museums, and they're incredibly expensive to build, and they take years to do it. And I'm trying to think where they could encourage future museums to be built in redundant large floor plate office spaces that are being redundant now, instead of going through the dedicated high cost of building the dedicated museum buildings, in a similar manner to what's going on with if you've heard of the new White House Visitor Center on, I think, 17th Street, in a new museum in an existing office building. And I'm just wondering whether they consider new museums using existing office buildings for future museums in the district. Thank you.
I think from a building format perspective, it'd be less expensive to build a new building than to retrofit an office building for museums. And it has to do with column spacing and ceiling heights.
Well, thank you. Thank you to our panelists here. Thank you to our audience. Once again, our next conversation, hopefully carrying on from the success of this one, will be on May 16th here. And hopefully we had a council member, Bonds was here. I don't know if she's in the room right now, but she was here earlier. I mean, this is the kind of, there she is back there. I'm sorry. Hello, welcome. So, I mean, we hope that the decision makers hear us, and we want to hear them too. So, but we certainly heard from our panelists. Thank you very much. So there's refreshments out in the lobby. So hopefully once again, if anybody wants to learn more about the Committee of 100, come and talk to one of the members here with the badge, or come talk to me out in the lobby. So thank you.